Okay, so tell me when you want to get going and I'll do it.
Okay, well, I've started recording now. So what we're going to do is, it's basically for the radio show for the podcast chart. And we want to know about the launch of Earworm. I'm going to lift the audio off of that. But I thought I'll record this Zoom chat. And if it's good, I'll stick this on YouTube as well. And it'll promote the whole thing, if that's cool with you.
Cool with me.
All right. Well, let's get started then. So we're recording this about a month into lockdown. How's it going for you?
You know what? It's a terrible thing to say. And I know that awful things are happening. But I'm really quite enjoying lockdown. I mean, I'm an ex-goth. I do a lot of work at home anyway. I don't really like meeting people. It's just perfect for me. I go out for a walk once a day with my dogs and people stay away from me. And if we do speak, it's just very quickly about dogs. I'm having a good lockdown, you know, but obviously I'm aware that there's terrible things happening for terrible people, but for me, it's not that different really. I mean, I think because I'm someone that does a lot of writing and stuff, it's not like I've suddenly had to, you know, I've gone from an office job to home. It's kind of, that's my life anyway, really. And very weirdly, my family, we're a very argumentative family. And I thought we're going to die in this. Like, this is going to be the big breakup. And we'll end up with like a line down the house where we're on both sides. But we've actually got on really well. I've been playing chess and board games with my kids. And I don't know, it's kind of like, I hate that whole, we're on a journey and we're all going to be different. I've been on too many reality shows to know. Everyone's like, oh my God, we're going to be so different when this is over. Bollocks, like 2 days after this is over, we'll go back to what we were. But for now, it's kind of nice. So I do weird things. Like Tim Burgess's listening parties. I don't know if you know about those. He gets, it's an amazing thing on Twitter. Tim Burgess from the Charlatans. He basically every night he gets two of his favorite bands. So last night was The Cult and Lloyd Cole. And basically you all play the record at the same time. And then Lloyd Cole will be commenting on what was happening during it. And you're like, that's amazing. Like, there's great things from it.
The shame of it is we don't know how long it will last. So we don't know, you know, whether because it's the open-endedness of it that's ruining it, really. If we thought, well, like, we're just going to lock down for 6 weeks, you could really plan out some really cool stuff to do, but we can't. That's the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the ultimate nightmare is the not knowing. And you kind of think, how does this end? Because I mean, I'm starting to see a thing where certain people have had it, and so they'll almost have a tattoo saying, you know, had it, and then the people that haven't will become like second-class citizens. We won't be allowed into restaurants and stuff. So yeah, it's a very complicated thing. The worst thing for being a writer is people say, oh my God, it must be amazing for you. Like, you can just sit there writing. But actually, I'm doing lots of creative stuff, but writing there's a sort of inner anxiety. It just doesn't make me want to write at the moment. So it's not as easy as people think it is, maybe. Is
that because with writing you need to be inspired and influenced with the things going on in the outside world, and really there's not that much going on that you can't control?
Well, I'd love to say that, but actually the book I'm writing at the moment is about traveling around Britain, and I've done my traveling around with all my notes, so there's no excuse. But it's just I think because it is such a weird time, you kind of feel, oh my God, I really need to be using this time to do something. And actually, I think if you beat yourself up too much about that, you know, everyone's like, I should be baking, I should be doing all this. And I think really, it's such a weird time. You just need to be nice to yourself. Well, by that, I mean, just lie around, watch telly and listen to podcasts.
Talking of podcasts, why are you doing another series of podcasts?
Why?
The Earworm, yeah. I mean, you do so many things. You're in the middle of a tour before lockdown. Obviously, You've done a lot of TV for lots of different people. You're a writer, travel writer. Why a podcast?
Well, my real love in life is travel. It really is. And so I do a lot of traveling. I write travel books. My book, The Hezbollah Hiking Club, came out last year, where I walked across Lebanon, and I was touring holiday snaps talking about that. But I still kind of love annoying people in the sort of trigger happy way. And I realized that I'm too old really to dress as a squirrel, I think, and my kids would be just a bit embarrassed. But actually the telephone, I've always loved telephone pranks. Like Trigger Happy really was kicked off my sort of first love of that sort of comedy was a couple of people called the Jerky Boys, and they used to work in the MTV press room, and they used to just ring. They used to get all bands' phone numbers and ring up bands and annoy them. So I've always loved the idea that you can just sit here, rather than trigger happy, where I had to spend a year going around the country getting beaten up. I can just sit here and contact the whole world. So I thought I'd make a telephone prank show, and series 1 I did, and I got my favorite musician ever, Baby Bird, who everyone knows for You're Gorgeous and thinks that's it, but he's an utter genius. Stephen Jones sits in his basement and makes about 6 albums a year, and it's incredible music, and no one hears it. So I rang him up and said, would you do the music? And so so it's like me doing lots of stupid phone calls, and then with this beautiful music underneath, which gives it unwarranted depth, which is nice. So that went really well. And Audible, who are doing a lot of stuff in the podcast world and everything at the moment, they're trying to be the sort of Netflix of audio. They really liked it. So they bought the first series and commissioned a second series. So I made the second series before lockdown, and we've just been editing it, and it comes out, I think it's out now, actually. It was out on April the 27th or something.
The thing I like about your stuff, and Trigger Happy was like this too, and the podcast is the same way. It's never mean-spirited. It's just silly. You don't try and make people angry like a lot of the hidden camera shows, like the old Candid Camera and Punk'd. They try and make people angry. Was that a conscious decision? Did you go into that saying, right, we're gonna change?
No, but
no.
Growing up, I think you're wrong on that. Actually, with respect, I think early Candid Camera was really brilliant. It was surreal and it was odd. Then when I was sort of a kid, what happened was things like Game for a Laugh and Beadle's About, and that it was just sort of stupid. It was a bit thick for a start, I thought, and it was a bit mean. It was just just making people angry, and I can make people angry, trust me, anytime, because that's what I do. But I loved Hidden Camera as a concept of using real people, but it always seemed to me that Hidden Camera was the lowest rung in comedy. Like, if you're smart in comedy, you're supposed to go and write sitcoms or movies and stuff. And I loved Hidden Camera, but it's normally done by thickos, to be honest. And I just thought, why not make it? I mean, it really sounds poncy, but I wanted to make it a kind of art form, because it is really difficult. I mean, people go, who wrote Trigger Happy? No one wrote it. I made it up. It's all ad-libbed, and people don't realize that. And then obviously I really helped it, because I think I've got quite good music taste, by putting my favorite music on, which is all quite sad, which gives it, again, very unwarranted depth. But I just love it. It was a real work of love for me. And yeah, it's not about, if I did something to someone and they went away angry, I think I'd be annoyed, really. What I love the feeling when people go away and then sort of get home that night and the wife goes, how was your day? And go, yeah, it's fine. Actually, it was a bit weird, this scout trying to get me to give them a homoerotic badge or whatever. I just love, it's a bit of weirdness in life, which is no bad thing.
You mentioned the music, which was really important in Trigger Happy TV. How much did it help that you were a musician in an indie band before that?
Well, I think musician is pushing it. I was a singer in an indie band.
Okay.
I had a cowbell solo, which even then I got out of time. But I've always been into music. I mean, I was always more into music. And actually, I was more excited about putting the just specific moments on Trigger Happy than doing the actual jokes. And I was in a band. I've made pop videos since. I've directed for Ian Brown and stuff. Music is my first love, but unfortunately, I just have no real talent in it. I mean, I can sort of sing, but it was never going to happen, really. I got boosted out of the band for musical differences, which I think was code for your shit. So, it was fine.
But your drummer was involved in the editing, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. That was very good research. Yeah, so the band was called Hang David, and Dave was my oldest friend. And then he and I both got jobs at MTV as runners, and I left to go off to be a diplomat, as you do, and he stayed. And so by the time I sort of had gone through being a diplomat and then a political journalist, and then came back to doing Trigger Happy, Dave had kind of got up and become this editor. And one of the joys of one of the problems with an editor, especially if you don't know them and you don't know what you're doing, which we didn't, is you kind of say, can you try and do this? And then they noodle away for ages, and then they play it and it's just shit. And then you have to go, oh, and you sort of hedge around it. But because I knew Dave, I could just say, Dave, that is crap. And he wouldn't take offense and we wouldn't take offense. And also because he was a drummer, he just had a natural beat. So he totally understood that Trigger Happy was about cutting on the beat. So for instance, normally you'd make a show and then chuck music on it. I'd find a track I wanted to use, and then I'd extend a joke so that it wouldn't cut the you know, it was the music led it rather than the comedy, if you see what I mean. So it was so important. And it's why it was terrible when we sold Trigger Happy abroad. They just take the music off and dump a library soundtrack on. And it doesn't work like that. You know, it was cut to the beat. But, you know, it was so much fun. It was great.
Because you sold it to the Americans, did it? But you didn't like that version of it. I haven't seen any of it. How bad was it?
That's different. I sold it to 80 countries, and everyone, we had to put this kind of shit soundtrack on, apart from Germany, who bought the entire soundtrack, and it cost more. I mean, I think it was like 22 grand just to use the title theme, and I was using 20 tracks a show. So it was a massive buy, but they did that. And America, MTV offered to buy it, but without the original music. And I said no. And then I moved to the BBC, and I thought, and Comedy Central wanted to buy it. And I thought, fuck it, better that than nothing. So they bought it with the shit music, but then they commissioned an American version. And that's when I should have maybe gone to America, but I just had kids. I didn't really want to go to America. So I ended up exec producing that, went out and did a couple of bits for it. And then I saw what they were doing, and it was so bad. It was like someone had sort of taken the piss out of Trigger Happy. They're just random slow-mo, some fluffy animals, shit indie music. I mean, it was like a spoof. It was so bad, but it was good. I mean, you know, it's life, really.
Does it bother you that as a best-selling author and a travel writer and a presenter and a columnist and a comedian, you're best known as the bloke with the big phone?
Does that bother me? Well, it's weird. I mean, I'm very thrilled to do something that has got, you know, I mean, it is part of the national psyche. When that ringtone goes off, I know people think of me. Am I proud that my catchphrase is hello? Not really. I suppose what annoys me the most is actually the big mobile was my least favorite part of Trigger Happy. I mean, I used to put it before the titles because actually most of Trigger Happy was quite sad, and it was about me having a nervous breakdown or running away and beautiful moments. And that was a big shouty thing. So interesting thing about the mobile was even if you hadn't seen Trigger Happy, you'd know about the mobile. So no, I'm not sad about it. I just wish I never really thought about being a comedian. So, you know, I did Trigger Happy, and then I thought, now I want to do these other things. I want to be a travel writer. I want to do all that stuff. And I suppose if I'd have just focused on being a comedian, it's that 10,000 hours thing. If you've done 10,000 hours at something, you become amazing or whatever. You know, I would have gone off to America and done it. But no, I've loved every second of my life, I have to say. So no.
The show did, though, originally take its toll on your mental health, didn't it? You had panic attacks.
Well, I think I already had dodgy mental health. I grew up in a war in Lebanon. Yeah, you know, mentally I was not very stable. I had a very bad divorce. My parents had a bad divorce, and I had panic attacks a lot in my 20s, and then they went away. I mean, I was a goth, you know, it's par for the course. And then, yeah, just when we were making Trigger Happy, about a week before we finished filming the first series, and I was literally, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And suddenly I'm 29, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm making this. I knew it was a good show. Like, we could feel it was amazing. And I remember the very sketch we were filming, I was dressed as the Dutch tourist outside Sloane Square Tube, and I just got in a cab, and the cab said, where are you going, mate? And I said, my egg must be boiled, and just talking nonsense to him. And I got out the cab, we'd done this sketch, and I said to Sam, oh, I don't feel well. He said, what? I just don't know. I went home, and I went home and just lay in bed for 3 weeks with just crippling depression. And it got to the extent where insurance said, if you don't come back in 2 days, the whole show will be, you know, we can't pay for it. And I remember thinking, fuck, I've got to this stage, and literally this depression is going to take it away from me. It wasn't depression, it was sort of hyper, I don't know, it wasn't a form of depression. So yeah, it was terrible. And then I started taking antidepressants and changed my life. I mean, people sort of talk about how bad antidepressants are, and I'm sure they are for some people, and some people got really bad side effects. But for me, just never had anything since, and just changed my life and made my life, you know, workable. It was amazing. I mean, possibly it's dimmed the madness. I think there's an element of madness and instability that if you have it really bad one way, it gives you a creative side on the other. And I always think that's why if you're very normal and stable and dull, well, you see, I say dull. You probably have a very happy life, but you're not very artistic. So I think possibly the antidepressants have slightly stemmed my madness and creativity, but I don't know. But it means I'm not weeping all the time, so it's good.
Well, after Trigger Happy, you got well paid. I think it was a 4-year deal with the BBC, but you weren't happy there either.
No,
What
I'm
was that
never
all
happy.
about?
No, well, yeah. No, I went to the BBC and I went to the BBC and I started making a show called 100 Things to Do Before You Die. And the idea was, it was like one of those shows, but it was like the wrong person had been given the show. So instead of parachute jumping, I'd lock myself in a fridge and see whether the light went out when the door closed. It was like a weird thing. And we started making it and I was really chuffed with it. It was for BBC Two. And I pitched this at Channel 4 before I left and they liked it. All the people at Channel 4 left and went to Channel 5. And I'm halfway through making a show. I opened The Guardian. I don't read it, but it was there. And it said Channel 5 September list, 100 Things to Do Before You Die. And the fuckers had just nicked it totally. And they put it out before mine. So I had to go to BBC Two and say, you know what, they've nicked it and they've done it. So I have to cancel. And we were halfway through the show. And they said, well, just carry on. And I said, no, they've done it already and it's different. Anyway, it was a nightmare. So that got me a reputation at the BBC for being tricky. So I had to sort of stop. And then I launched BBC Three with a fake chat show. And I called it This Is Don Joly, but I was wearing glasses. And it was so obvious to me that it wasn't me. But everyone, I wanted 20% of people to watch it to think, oh my God, Don Joly's a wanker. And the other 80% to get the joke. As it was, I think 80% of people watched it and went, God, he's a wanker. Because, you know, I was this sort of ego version of me, and it was clearly faked, but I don't know. But it had a lot of fun. Had lots of bands on it. I love how The Cure on, the Waterboys, Ian Brown. I mean, everyone, Grandaddy. It was fantastic fun. And then I thought I'd better cash in my chips because I knew the BBC were like, what is this guy doing? So I got a show for BBC One. So I made a kind of international trigger happy called World Shut Your Mouth, which is still my favorite show. And I kicked off each show. I thought it'd be really funny. I flew around the world in one trip to all the 7 wonders of the world, the Great Wall of China, the pyramids, the Taj Mahal, just to stand in front of it and wait for someone to come up. And I'd go, oh, Taj Mahal. And they go, yeah. And I go, well, that is shit. And that was it. That's all I did. And I thought that was the strongest, purest beginning. And honestly, when I handed it into the BBC, I could see them just thinking, this man has to leave the BBC. So that was it.
Your autobiography, Here Comes the Clown, came out in 2015, but 10 years before that, you did a spoof autobiography called Look at Me. Why did the parody one come first? It would seem like the natural procedure to do a normal one and then parody that.
Because when Trigger Happy was at its height, someone came to me and offered me a stupid amount of money to write my autobiography. And I'd always said, you should never write. I mean, Martine McCutcheon was on her 3rd volumes of her autobiography at the age of about 23. And I was like, you really shouldn't write an autobiography till you're 50, as far as I'm concerned. But I think
Britney Spears wrote one before she'd had sex. I mean, how interesting could that have been?
Well, I mean, none of these people write their books anyway, for a start. But anyway, so they offered me a silly amount of money. I couldn't turn it down. And I thought, great, I'll do it. And then the moment I'd accepted, I thought, oh, fuck, I can't. I hate these sort of books. So then I thought, I'll do a pastiche. I'll do a sort of piss take book. And at the time, Annika, no, Annika, I can't remember, but there were a lot of shit autobiographies out at the time. And I thought, I'll write a pastiche one. And then I started writing, and it just segued into this weird thing where it sort of is my life, but it's not really. It's like I mean, page 2, I had a talking dog, so it's pretty obviously not my life. But people were like, is this real? But actually it was. Like, it was Lebanon and then a diplomat and stuff. And it went up to the moment I was famous, but in a sort of totally heightened, it was as though I was on acid. I have no idea what that book is. I'm quite proud of it actually now, but it was weird. And it absolutely died.
So, I mean, using the book for research then, so you didn't murder your Armenian nanny and you weren't raped by a TV weather girl and it wasn't covered up?
There are a couple of things that did happen.
What worries me is you went, just, you had to think.
Well, I did end up in a weird flat in Edinburgh with a guy that was a weather reporter and was dancing with his Pekingese. I didn't get raped, obviously. But there are a lot of weird bits in it that are true. There's a Peter Mandelson story in there that's pretty close, and there's weird stuff, yeah.
According to Wikipedia, you went to the same school as Osama bin Laden. Is that bit true?
That is true, yeah. And that is, I mean, I talk about that on my tour that has been rescheduled. But I did a show where I went off. It was called Excellent Adventure, and I was supposed to drive into Syria, where I used to go as a kid from Lebanon. So I flew to Lebanon with a mate, and we were going to go on this road trip into Syria. But the director said, before we go, be nice to see what it was like growing up in Lebanon. Let's go to your old school. So I went to my old school, which is called Brumana High School. And very weird, it's a Quaker school in the mountains above Beirut. And it was built by Quakers from Darlington in 1860. Like, what the fuck they were doing there, I have no idea. But anyway, so I went there, and I was filming in the grounds, because I'd got a fixer, and he'd said, yeah, we sorted it out. And this woman marches out, she's livid, and she's the headmistress. And it turns out the fixer did what I would have done. He just took the money and fucked off. He didn't ask anyone. So she had no idea what we were doing. So she starts screaming at me, what are you doing here? And I go, I'm really sorry, we're making a documentary. And why? I go, well, because I went to school here. She goes, who gives a shit? So I was like, yeah, fair point. But I was like, to be honest, I think I'm probably one of your more famous alumni. And she looked at me and said, I don't think so. And I go, well, who's more? And she goes, Osama bin Laden. And I go, okay. So then she panicked, because it's a Quaker school. Can you imagine taking prospective parents round and going, Quakers are pacifists, and saying, I don't know if you know about our most famous alumni, Osama bin Laden. So they then denied it. And I tried to find a school photo of me and bin Laden, because he was 16 and I was 6, and this was 1974. So we were there together for a year. But obviously, I didn't know him. I didn't meet him. He didn't look like that at the time. The bin Ladens looked like the Partridge Family back then. So, but yeah, I did.
Right. So it's a shame you didn't get to know him, because you could have maybe convinced him, his life could have gone a different way. It's like these people who say they had a time machine, they go back and kill baby Hitler, or at least go back and tell him that his art was pretty good. It could have changed the world. Yeah. So
Well, maybe I'd have joined Al Qaeda. Who knows?
You could have gone the other way. Yes, it could. Yeah. It could have done. Growing
it's
up,
not good for me when I go to the States, though, because they look at my passport, born in Beirut. Then they look it up online. It says trigger happy, comedy terrorist, went to school with bin Laden. I've got visas from Iran, North Korea, Congo. It's not a pleasant thing when I go to America.
Yeah, especially in an airport if you tell them you're there to shoot a pilot. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Now, growing up outside the UK, I mean, I had a chat with Richard E. Grant, who grew up in Swaziland, and he said it almost made him more British. Did you get the feeling?
No, it's weird. My parents were British. My dad fought in the war. He fought in the Fleet Air Arm. He was very British. But yeah, they were kind of stuck, because, I was born in 67. Like everyone else was shagging at Woodstock. My parents lived as though it was still 1950. It was very kind of expat life. So I was sort of doubly, I felt very British, but also because I grew up in Lebanon and I went to French schools and I speak French. All the stuff I read was weird and surreal, from Tintin, Asterix, Lucky Luke. I had a sort of continental weirdness, I think, with the British sense of humor. And then when I went to boarding school, you're just taught sarcasm, cynicism, self-defense, attack before you're attacked, all the things that make you a good member of the Tory cabinet. So I kind of had all that mix. But I think it's the French part, the Belgian part of me, that brings things like trigger happy, actually.
And you went to some pretty posh schools. How did your parents react to you then going for a career in comedy? I mean, you did you're a diplomat, but eventually it was comedy. It was you were dressed as a squirrel.
Yeah, I don't think they cared really. I mean, my dad was a frustrated, he was a writer. He wrote 5 books, but in those days he had to take over the family business in Lebanon, which is what I was supposed to do. And I think he always felt that he had to do duty before, what he wanted to do. And I think he actually hated the fact that I did do that. We didn't get on very well, so this is all very complicated stuff. But yeah, I don't think they mind. I don't think they really understood. I mean, I still think, what was the thing? I think when I did View from the Boundary on Test Match Special, that was the only time my parents thought, oh my God, yeah, he's doing well. So no, they've no idea. I mean, what do you do? I mean, when I married my wife, imagine going to Canada where trigger happy's never been shown, and they go, what does your husband do? He shouts into a big cellular phone. All right, okay, like that.
The difficult relationship you had with your family, do you think that helped? Because, you know, a lot of comedians have difficult relationships,
Father
particularly
issue.
with their father issues. Does that help people be funny?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I did read some statistic about that, and I think it makes you very needy for attention. I think genuinely that, and I'm very needy for attention, obviously, and I think that must bring out the I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to analyze because I am who I am. I have no idea really. And I went to a shrink once and just it was just a waste of time really because I'm sort of trying to work out what they're trying to work out from me. And I kind of thinking I'm sort of self-aware enough to know my problems. So I don't know. Yeah, but it's definitely an issue with that. It's definitely Daddy, look at me, I think. Well, in fact, that's why I called that book, Look at Me, Look at Me. I mean, that is it.
Yeah, I can relate. I had similar problems, and something that you said in an interview, I think it was with the Belfast Telegraph, I think this interview was, and you said after your dad died, you realised you'd mourned him for 10 years before, and I totally got that. Yeah,
It's really weird that because my dad and I, we just didn't speak, you know, for 10 years. And I kind of thought, right, that's done. You know, it really was upsetting and I worked through it. And this is all when trigger happy was happening. So probably part of my panic attacks and stuff. And then I just thought, well, you know what, just deal with it and it's gone. And then annoyingly, he kind of got slow dementia. But there was a period where we sort of got back together, but it wasn't the same person. It was like a very gentler person. And I thought, this is so unfair now. I'm going to get upset when he dies. But I didn't really know him. But actually, when he died, I felt free, actually. I didn't, it's not because I'm callous. I didn't really mourn it because I had mourned him 10 years ago. So, yeah, it was a very weird thing to say, though. I felt wrong saying it, but it's true.
yeah. My dad died this year, and I felt wrong because I didn't feel anything when I heard the news. But
Did you
then
not have a good
when I
relationship?
no, but then when I read what you said in yours and said you'd mourned him for 10 years, then it all made sense. Yeah, I have been kind of.
I've just literally yesterday read this book called The Kamikaze Killers, which someone sent me, and it's about the Fleet Air Arm. My dad flew off an aircraft carrier in 1945 when he was 18. At 19, he was in the last year of the war, and he was terrified all the way through, but you couldn't say it at the time. And I think that was a massive problem for him later on, psychologically. Anyway, I never knew all this stuff. And then I read this book, and it was written by someone who was on his aircraft carrier. And you're like, fuck, I mean, all the stuff they went through. And I was like, why? I mean, the book came out in 2015. He died in 2011. But I was like, why? I would have killed to been able to read that book when he was alive. Because then I'd have been able to ask him specific questions. But you only ever get interested in your parents, really, the older you, when you become a parent. And it's normally too late. Everyone always says that. And you're like, yeah, whatever. But it's bollocks.
You've done a lot of traveling, written books about traveling. So I'm trying to make a gear change here, and it's an awkward one. So,
no, you can gear change, I don't know.
Yeah. You made a lot of TV programs about your travels.
Yeah.
It'd be fair to say, I reckon that maybe Dom Joly is a punk Michael Palin, which is.
I'd take that. I really would take that. I saw him once in the street, and I was driving. And there was a tiny part of me thought I could just go like that and get it. I need to kill Bill Bryce and Michael Palin and a couple more. Yeah. And there was just a tiny part of me thinking, God. No, I met him once. He is just annoyingly the nicest man I've ever met. So he's great. But yeah, punk Michael Palin, I'd take.
Yeah, the book Dark Tourist then, sightseeing in the world's most unlikely holiday destinations. Which place did you visit that was the darkest?
Well, actually, weirdly, in Dark Tourist, none of them were that dark. I mean, there were elements of Cambodia that were just horrific. I mean, actually, Cambodia was a proper story. Like, I went to Siem Reap. I had this translator with me who was amazing. And we both went up to Phnom Penh, the capital. And we went to a place called Tol Sleng, where my interpreter's dad had been taken away and basically was one of the disappeared and people killed by the Khmer Rouge. And there was the picture of his dad taken the moment before he'd been brought in there and then he'd been killed later. And we saw that. And then 2 days later, I met a war criminal, the guy who worked in the concentration camp who took the photographs, and he's still alive and no one had ever prosecuted him. So I went and met this guy who'd taken, it was just awful. And then I actually went to a war crimes tribunal which was going on in Phnom Penh. I managed to get in, and there was this guy I'd been reading about who literally had smashed babies against trees and stuff, and it was like pure evil. And I went in, I was terrified about seeing this guy because I'd read so much about him, and it was this big thick screen, and there's audience here, and then the judge going on in there, and I went in, and it was that moment when you see there was that quote about Adolf Eichmann called the banality of evil, and it really was. I was expecting this monster, and there was just this really, he looked like an accountant. He was just sitting there in a suit, and this guy had just done terrible things. Cambodia was extraordinary because it was very like Lebanon, where I grew up. You know, at the time, Lebanon and Cambodia in the 70s were rivaling each other for international headlines, and they were both French colonies. But Cambodia was particularly weird because a whole generation was wiped out. So anyone of sort of my age, well, a bit older than me, wandering around, you thought you're only wandering around because you were part of the regime. I mean, it's an amazing place. But the darkest place I've been is not in the Dark Tourist. It was the Congo. The only place I've been truly, truly terrified. Because normally you go to places and you can gauge danger. So you can sort of see whether something's getting dodgy or not. Chernobyl was difficult because they call it, like Trump calls coronavirus, the invisible enemy. So you kind of, you start getting paranoid and your tongue goes metallic and you think, how much radiation am I taking in? But normally you can tell whether you're in danger or not. Congo, I was just, just totally out of my league. I flew up to the very north of the Congo to try and go to this lake. I was a monster hunter trying to find a monster called the Makele Mbembe. I thought I was Tintin. And I just 3-day canoe ride. The village I got to all got pissed and someone attacked me with a machete. He got tied to a tree. I had to escape in a canoe. And it was terrible. I thought I was so out of my depth. But also there was a part of me thinking, fuck, if I get out of here, this is going to be such a good story. So, which is kind of the nice bit of travel writing, is normally you travel to have a good time. But when things go wrong, I'm like, oh, this is brilliant because it's going to make a good copy, which is not good.
So you put yourself in another scary place. You did I'm a Celebrity. For a bloke with a history of panic attacks, that seems like an odd decision.
Well, it is, except, I mean, firstly, reality shows make sense to me because I have a very limited skill set. And part of my skill set is ad-libbing. So I was on I'm a Celeb with Jenny Eclair. Now, Jenny Eclair's amazing.
She's not an ad-libber, is she?
No, and she won the Perrier. She's brilliant. But she was terrified, and I didn't realize that before. I never saw what I had as a skill. And I'd go onto shows and just ad-lib and not be very funny. And I was like, why not? And I realized they all prepare very carefully. And Jenny script and crafts her stuff. But on shows like I'm a Celeb, when they go, this is what you got to do, I'm like, fucking brilliant. And Jenny hated it. So firstly, I know that I'm all right in that sort of situation. Secondly, I just love reality TV. In a sense, it's very linked to Hidden Camera and the stuff I do. And I love watching it. I only watch documentaries. I like real stuff. And I'd watched that show since it started. I just thought, of course, I'm going to go and do it. It'd be amazing. And actually, I would have killed in most other years. I would have physically killed someone. But I was just really lucky in my year. I had Sean Ryder, Nigel Havers, Britt Eklund. I mean, a bit dull, but I had Britt Eklund, Jenny, who was brilliant. And then we had this sort of uber baddie, Dr. Gillian McKeith. So it was fucking amazing. So in the end, I lost 2 stone. I had a 22-day total digital detox. I fucking loved it. The worst one was the island with Bear Grylls.
Really?
Barely there Grylls, as I called him.
Barely there Grylls? What,
yeah.
Was he never there?
No, of course not. So we turned up in Panama. We're trained for 2 days by his Royal Marines. We had a whole day learning how to make furniture out of bamboo, stuff out of bamboo, all this stuff, and I'm concentrating. Then we get on the island. There's no fucking bamboo. But anyway, on the day we go, Bear Grylls appears on the beach, takes his shirt off because I think he's contractually obliged to, then drives us to the island. He does a bear prayer because he's a god botherer, and the crew are all like, oh, for fuck's sake, we're never going to show it. And then he boots us off, and honestly, the worst 3 weeks of my life. I mean, I didn't eat a single thing 3 weeks, nearly died of it was just awful, but I survived it. But my leg was just savaged by sandflies, and they gave me mild leprosy, which I've still got on my leg. That was
mild leprosy?
Well, yeah, they actually laid eggs in my leg. And I went to the London School of Medicine and Tropical Hygiene, which is somewhere we'll all be going right now. And the guy, he was one of those guys where I showed him the picture of it. And he said, I'll show you a picture of it, actually. He was one of those guys doctors that talk to you as though it's interesting, forgetting that they're actually talking about your body. And he was going, yes, this is sandflies. Interestingly, they've actually buried eggs. Can you see this? This is my leg when I came off. Pretty disgusting.
Yeah.
And they buried eggs in my leg. And he said, technically, it's a very mild form of leprosy. I went, oh, isn't that brilliant?
And he's thinking, this is fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, no, but he does. Yeah, he had no bedside manner at all.
And it would be if it wasn't you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when this is all over, you're going to finish the tour. You've got the book out, Hezbollah Hiking Club, and you're writing the new book, but you've got to get round to that because the lockdown's kind of getting in the way.
New book. Yeah. The new book is, I kind of, because I've been to over 100 countries and I've kind of ignored Britain really. So I thought I'd been a bit unfair. And because I was going on this tour, I thought the book is called Such Miserable Weather. And after a song by the Sundays. And I just wanted to kind of try and fall in love with England. And I have actually. I've just been to so many weird places. I've been to places that I thought I hated to give them a second chance, like Birmingham. I just didn't get Birmingham. But actually I really love it now. And it is about just really making an effort with places and then going to places that I'd never thought of going to. And just, it's a weird book. I don't know what it's going to be like, but it should be fun.
I liked Birmingham. I lived there. I worked at a radio station there for 3 years. And when I first got there, I couldn't get the hang of it because it didn't have a coast or a river. So I never knew where I was. And then I worked out it's the M6. And you've got to work out kind of which, that's how you kind of position yourself in Birmingham, which side of the M6 you're on.
That was my problem with it. When you arrive, because it's so kind of roads everywhere, you can't really walk it. And you're like, where am I? And then I found the canals and I'm like, I get it. And I love bits of it now. Really nice.
Yeah, it's great. I had a great time there. Good people there too.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've been listening to a lot of podcasts and it's a podcast chart show on podcast radio. Who do you like? Who do you listen to and why?
Well, I listen to kind of odd ones. I mean, I'm obsessed. My favorite one, the one I listen to the most is This American Life.
Yeah.
Is an incredible American one. Done by Philip Glass's cousin, I think, and John Bronson's occasionally on it. Yeah, Ira. And it is, I think people always go on about, and it's one of the things I notice when I travel, how brilliant British radio is compared to almost anywhere in the world. Things like Radio 4 and World Service. But actually, This American Life, I think, is just stunning. It's kind of always, every week it's a themed, they have sort of 3 reports and they're themed. It's very difficult to describe because it's so different every week.
But they go, what I like about it is they go so far and so deep. They did one, it's years ago, they found what they thought was the recipe for Coca-Cola was found in wherever it was, Atlanta or somewhere. And instead of just going, oh, isn't that interesting, and here are the ingredients, they found a chemist to try and make it and tasted it. Going that far, that great.
I totally agree. I mean, I think to me, it's kind of when you watch a great documentary and there's a tiny idea and then someone's just gone with it. And it's like that. They're a bit like, if I'm going to be Ponzi, to me, they're a bit like the New Yorker. And actually, they are very New Yorker types. As in the New Yorker magazine, if you read an article in the New Yorker, it's not a 2-pager. It's like 16 pages. And they just go into such detail. And the one I remember the most that I absolutely loved was when they were talking about why, if you look at all condiments, there's lots of types of mayonnaise, lots of type of mustard, but how come ketchup, kind of Heinz own ketchup, there's no other real ketchup? And you're like, yeah, that's interesting. And then they just went into the whole, it's so minutiae, but I mean, this sounds incredibly dull, but done by them, I just loved it. And then I love everything about it. So that keeps me happy. And I do lots of walks around here in the Cotswolds and I'm always listening to podcasts. The other one that's probably my biggest obsession that I've listened to for so long is Wittertainment, Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo. I'm not massively into films. I am into films, but I'm not a film buff. But I think there's something about those two that's so perfect. It's kind of like, it's what a great podcast is when you're listening to it. It's friendship. You can tell it's brilliant. And Mark is, the Don of films, really. And he overanalyzes films way too much for my liking. Often when he really recommends a film, I hate it. But I love his passion for it. And when he has a proper rant at something appalling. So I'm remembering, I think Sex and the City's 2nd or 3rd movie, he spent a good 20 minutes almost exploding. And I was just I was in the middle of a wood on my own. You know, the tree fell, and does anyone hear? I was in the middle of a wood just howling with laughter, which was just amazing. So I love that. And then I listened to lots of other weird ones. Obviously, I listened to the big ones, like Serial was incredible. S-Town apps. These are the big hit ones I know for podcast people. But they're so amazing. And they're the moment where I'm doing a lot of stuff for Audible now. And I think that's when Audible realized, God almighty, like there's stuff going on in audio that really could be like Netflix, you know, when those things just became so massive. And then I like smaller things like Freakonomics. I love. I'm very much of a theme. I don't listen to much comedy and stuff, but I'm trying to think what else I listen to. I'll look at my podcast list, otherwise I'll forget. Which will be good. This will be good for the interview. So Freakonomics, Full Disclosure with James O'Brien. It's all right.
Yeah.
Thing called In the Dark was absolutely amazing, which is it's a crime writer in, I think, Boston, just talking about there's someone that used to be a policeman. Radio Lab. Oh, I love Malcolm Gladwell as well. Revisionist History. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Amazing old one, which I really loved, by what's his name? Bennett Jones. By Owen Bennett Jones, which is called The Assassination, which was about the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. And that was amazing. Brilliant BBC one. I listened to one recently called The Missing Crypto Queen. Do you know that one?
No, what's that one about?
Oh, that's amazing. This is about this woman who basically, it's one of the biggest cons ever. And she set up it was almost like a religion. She kind of tried to set up her own Bitcoin. But
was this where they were testing blood for some reason? No?
Yeah,
I heard about it, but I've not heard it. Yeah.
It's absolutely, absolutely amazing. That was brilliant. And then I listened to another one, which is great, called The Sun King, which was won by David Dimbleby, I think, about Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, I've heard about that one. I haven't heard that one either.
I mean, that's the sort of thing you can only get when you work for the Beeb and you're David Dimbleby. Like it kind of felt like you're watching a beautiful Michael Palin show, you know.
It's not like a BBC one though, is it? It's independent, but they did have Dimbleby doing it.
It wasn't BBC. It was, I had to go somewhere special. It might have been Audible, actually.
Right.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I should be plugging lots of Audible stuff now because I'm about to go on Audible with Earworm. But yeah.
Exactly. So Earworm, what are the highlights?
See how I linked in there?
Oh, it was beautiful. Absolutely. A lot less clunky than my gear change earlier. Thank you. Yeah. So, Earworm, what should we be looking forward to?
So, I love it. I think if you like Trigger Happy, I think you'll enjoy Earworm because it's sort of, I mean, I kind of love old shows. It's got elements of the Jerky Boys, and there was some old Victor Lewis Smith used to do phone calls that were just weird. To me, I wanted to make prank calls, but if you listen to prank calls on the internet, they're all a bit the same. They're kind of jocks and they're sort of borderline sexual abuse, and they're just a bit unfunny, really. I mean, occasionally there are great ones. And these are more, I suppose they're like Robert Popper used to do some stuff. I can't remember the name of his character, but he'd just ring radio stations as this really boring man and just bore them to death till they had to hang up on him. So mine are sort of more in that vein of Henry Root type letters. They're just weird. So I have one which I love. I get so annoyed with people ringing me from somewhere that I pay, let's say my electricity bill, and they've rung me, and then they can't give me any information because of the Data Protection Act. You know, you're like, what are you talking about? So there's one where I ring a library and I'm trying to get a book, but I'm not allowed to tell them what the book is or who the author is because of the Data Protection Act. And it gets more and more ridiculous. I get one where I'm a fish fluencer, because I get so pissed off. I know people that run restaurants here in Cheltenham, and influencers ring them up and go, "Hi, I'm Cheltenham's #1 influencer. I've got 200 followers. Can I have a free meal?" So I'm a fish fluencer. I ring up fishmongers and basically get them just to talk about fish and give me free fish in return for some fish fluence and stuff. I got a goth who's trying to organise an unhappy hour. It's that kind of stuff, and it's really fun. It's just ringing people around the world, really, and just there's no excuse for it. I'm 52. I shouldn't be doing it, but it makes me laugh.
And Audible have got the first series as well, so it'll all be in the one place.
Yeah, so the first series went out. It was on Acast. It was on all sorts of and Spotify and stuff. But I think they've removed it because they're very efficient,
Yeah.
and they took it all off. And so they're re-releasing the first episode, which is they're sort of mini casts. Really, I didn't want to make 30 minutes of listening to stuff. It's quite long, so they're all about between 10 and 15 minutes long, little bite size. I wanted to make something. I thought, when do I listen to stuff like that? I either listen to a long podcast, or if I'm on a train or I want a quick 15-minute. It's a quickie, basically. So that's what they are. So there's 10, 15-minute episodes from the first series, and there's another 9 from the second. So I'm really chuffed with it.
And when are they out?
They are out. They were already out. They're April the 27th.
Okay.
But I'll be doing this later than.
Yeah, this is going to go out a week on Friday. The video version of this will go up this week, hopefully, but a week on Friday is when the podcast chart goes out. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think they go out next Monday, which is April the 27th or something. But
okay,
it's going to get front page Audible and stuff, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Dom Joly, it's been a treat talking to you. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Best of luck.
Therapy for me. It was amazing.
Best of luck with the new podcast and all the other stuff you're doing, including the Hezbollah book, the walking book that you've got out, and the new book that will be out soon. And let's hope the tour kicks off again. Just could we briefly talk about what's in the tour?
It's all rescheduled. Starts in September. Basically, it's kind of like all, people look at me and think, how come the squirrel guy goes to North Korea? And to me, it makes total sense. So I've got all these photos and clips from weird places I've traveled. So obviously the idea of dullness is your neighbor going, do you want to come see my holiday snaps? And that's what it is. It's my holiday snaps, but hopefully they're a bit more interesting than usual. But they talk about things like going to school with bin Laden in Cambodia and getting attacked in the Congo and, a bit of everything. It's really good, I think, but then it's my show.
Brilliant. Before you go, could you do me one favor for the promo for On the Radio? It's not particularly creative, but if you could do, hello, yeah, I'm on with Graham Mack, podcast radio. No, it's rubbish. Do you need to write that down?
No.
Okay.
You ready?
Yep.
Hello? No. Oh, no, I'm on with Graham Mack. Podcast radio. No idea, it's rubbish. Yeah, still doing this shit.
Fantastic. Dom Joly, thank you so much. Yeah, brilliant, mate. Thank you.
All right, cheers for that. I enjoyed that.